Well, hey man, it's great to meet you again. I'm looking forward to getting into the music and your life and music, so thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Glad
Yeah,
to be part of it.
absolutely. So let's begin our journey with 5 years ago, this pandemic was
Yeah.
raging. It was melting away calendars. So many things were unsure, unclear, not only for all of us, but especially musicians. How much of living
Right.
through that has reverberated into what you're doing today?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking that question. I mean, that was 5 years ago, which is a long time, but at the same time, when you think about everything that we and the world went through, it's was just yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Um, we actually released our previous album in the midst of the pandemic, and so we actually never had a album release show for that or anything like that. So yeah, it was a sort of an existential experience for everyone, and I think for musicians, it was especially disorienting, right? Because it was sort of like the thing that we do, we couldn't do for a period of time. Um, for me and for the band, yeah, I think I tried to channel a lot of that into some of the music that was written for this album. And, I mean, I do believe that when faced with challenges can, I suppose they can bring out the worst in humanity, but they can also bring out the best in humanity as well. And, I think that the experience of just suddenly practically waking up one day and sort of seen your whole life trajectory and all the plans that you had made. And like you said, all of the gigs that you had worked so hard to book and all those things just suddenly like wiped away, was a humbling experience, and sort of turn, made me sort of turn inward and become introspective about, well, who am I? Who are we? What is this all about? Why do we do music in the first place, right? Why does this matter? And that inspired a lot of the music that was written for this album. On the flip side of that, Joe, I think having the, you know, as I'm sure you know, being a musician, it can be a very hectic lifestyle. The pace can, you're sort of traveling a lot and you're running from one gig to the next. And so I think there was also, in a way, and of course not to diminish the profound loss of that time, but also in a way it was sort of a gift to be able to step back and we were sitting at home for days and weeks on end, and that also was an opportunity to create.
So talk to me about this new album. Give me an idea of what the vision was and how you ultimately feel about it now that it's packaged and it's ready to go.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think I ever necessarily sort of sit down to write an album. I'm trying to constantly working on music and working on ideas. And so a lot of most of these songs were written in response to life events, or, for example, Chick, the tune on the album called Chick, which is dedicated to Chick Corea, that was written a few hours after I learned that he had passed suddenly, which was a huge shock to me and I think the rest of the world. Um, and it was one of those experiences where I had always been a fan of Chick Corea, but it wasn't until he passed away that I really realized how big of an impact he had on me and on my life and on my music. And it really hit me um, like a ton of bricks. And so it was one of I went for a walk. I started sort of getting ideas on the walk, and I came back and I wrote that tune. Um, Eulogy was sort of similar in the sense that it was also inspired by the loss of a dear friend and mentor. And that one just sort of, came out pretty quickly as a kind of reaction to that. And then there were a few others that were written under different circumstances, but they were all, I mean, they were all, I would say, either written sort of inspired and dedicated to someone who was important to me in my life, or they were sort of written as an kind of an exploration to try to push the edges of the band. For example, there's a couple tracks on the album, Invocation and Stibro, that explore the territory that was pioneered by artists like Ornette Coleman, um, and others who are exploring, well, this idea of what Dave Liebman calls time no changes, right? Where there's time going on, but there aren't predetermined chord changes that are worked out in advance. That was something that was completely new to us as a band, but that we wanted to explore. And so those two were sort of vehicles for that. And again, it it just, when our world was sort of turned upside down, it felt like uh, I think I also had more appreciation for that kind of bold risk taking that artists like Ornette and Don Cherry and many others um, embodied and modeled for the rest of us.
So Chick Corea came to Kansas City in the late 90s. I was just getting into jazz, starting to see live shows and really getting wrapping my head around it. In fact, when I went to Seattle that year, I had my little Walkman with the CD
Hmm.
chamber and I listened to Kinda Blue on the way up and I was like, what spaceship did this thing fall out of?
Yeah,
It's
right.
just a different set.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Chick is with the Kansas City Symphony and
Uh,
he's playing and I keep noticing the conductor, she was a female. I can't remember what her name was, but she kept kind of getting exasperated and I was far back and I
uh,
could feel it. And he just wouldn't
uh.
stop. He just kept going. And then he finally got to the end where there was this crescendo and this big movement in it and she just gave up. She just put her arms up and Chick just went for it. But I can tell that's his
Yeah,
vibe. Like he's going to do what he wants to do, however he wants to
yeah,
do it. And
yeah.
everybody loved it. And everybody knew there was that kind of musical tension. And it just made everybody go
Interesting.
crazy, which is
Uh,
uncharacteristic for a classic show. So it was cool. I have a good
sure.
memory of him live for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Me too. I got to see him several times live, and it was always especially the last time was at this club here in Seattle called Jazz Alley, and yeah, I think he would. I saw him there once with Brian Blade and Eddie Gomez. That was incredible. Um, anyway, yeah, I'm a big fan of Chick, and I think for a band like ours, because our previous work more so than this album, but our previous work really owes a huge debt to music and rhythms from Cuba, Brazil, the Mediterranean, West Africa. And, for me, Chick was uh, certainly not the only one, but someone who really also was a big inspiration for me in the way that he brought different musical cultures together and blended and combined, bridged them with the jazz tradition.
Yeah.
And I think of Joe Zawinul as someone else who did that very effectively. And of course, that goes all the way back to the beginning. That goes all the way back to Jelly Roll Morton, right? And the Latin tinge. So to me, it's not like it's we're not really doing anything new or different necessarily. It's more just we're sort of, in my mind, trying to honor a tradition that goes back to the very beginning of jazz and sort of trying to do it in our own way, I guess, and from our own perspective.
So what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
I hope that, well, I hope that the listener, of course, enjoys the experience of listening to the album. But what does that mean? Um, I think I'm hoping that they get a sense of affirmation about life and humanity. It, uh, and I hope that they are inspired by the album. I hope that they're just, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I mean, there's always challenges, right? But there's a lot, if you look at the news, there's a lot of reasons to get discouraged and frustrated. And And so I think that's always sort of been one of the primary roles of art and music, right? And I think that, you know, is to help nurture our sort of humanity, our sense of resilience, like the give us charge our batteries, right? For whatever the challenges, and they don't have to be on a global scale. They can be very personal ones, you know. But yeah, so I hope that this album is able to do that for people, that it sort of gives them something, some energy, or pushes them maybe to do something, you know, creative, or inspires them in some way.
So, speaking of that energy, let's go to the beginnings of your life. Where were you born and raised? How did music become your life? And more specifically, jazz, how did that become your career?
Well, I was born in Chicago, Illinois, but I grew up in the Northwest. And you know, I my parents were not professional musicians, but as my dad always used to joke, he when people asked him if he played an instrument, he said he played the radio, which was huge, because there was music in the house, and my parents also had a large record collection. It was mostly classical music and folk music. I didn't get into blues and jazz until I was in middle school. I had my best friend at the time was a very talented guitar player. His dad was a professional trumpet player, and he turned me on to um, Jimmy Smith, Walk on the Wild Side, Thelonious Monk, Monk's Dream, and I think there was like a BB King Greatest Hits album and Al Green, um, and and I it you know just sort of blew my mind, and it, I started listening to that stuff. Jimi Hendrix. We formed a band in middle school. We played Jimi Hendrix covers. So I was taking like classical piano lessons at that time. I was drawn to music from the very beginning, you know, all kinds of music. I just loved it. But then when I started getting into middle school and high school and playing in bands and playing with, you know, other kids my age, and we would do talent shows and we would do school assemblies, and we'd get out there and play our set of four, maybe five songs that we knew. And it was pretty addictive. You know, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I think this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of continued down that path. And you know, when I was graduated from high school, I went to the University of Michigan, and I studied out there in Ann Arbor. Um, and then after, you know, I started working. I did my time, as they say, on a cruise ship for a while, wound up back in Seattle. But at some point, I was actually trying to really figure out. I mean, the experience of music school in hindsight, I can appreciate what I gained from that. But it was also being in a sort of conservatory academic setting was very intense, right?
Yeah.
And it sort of coming out of that, I really started questioning, wow, is this maybe I'm, you know, is this really what I want to do? Maybe I'm not cut out for this, all this kind of stuff. Fortunately, in Seattle, of all places, I connected with um, some really great musicians from Puerto Rico, from Peru, from Cuba, Brazil. Um, the Latin music community here in Seattle took me under its wing, um, and I had some incredible teachers who turned me on yet again. It was sort of like it was similar to that experience when I was that middle school or high school kid, where again it was just like opened my mind to this whole other world of music from Cuba, from Brazil, and from uh, New York and Puerto Rico and Los Angeles, and I just fell in love with it, and it you know, rekindled that uh, uh, you know, spark, I think, for playing music. And that was you know, there was a period of about 10 years where I was sort of apprenticing with in these different bands, and I also played, in a reggae band with a local, or actually internationally recognized Jamaican artist named Clinton Fearon. And anyway, all those experiences, after doing that for about a decade, I decided, you know what, I need to try to express all of this, in my own way. And so that's when I formed Duende Libre.
So, what was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away that made you think, I want to do that one day?
It was, well, I remember I think the first live jazz show I saw was, it might have been Lionel Hampton. And I think yeah, it was definitely at Jazz Alley here in Seattle. And Lionel was, he was not young at the time, and so he wasn't playing a whole lot, but man, did he have a good band.
Of course.
And yeah, he would play a few notes and then he would sort of, um, he had this big smile on his face, and and it was, yeah, that energy, the energy of the way that band played just blew me away. But I also got to see, I actually got to see Ray Charles, came to uh, my hometown of Everett, Washington. I mean, this was like in the 90s. I mean, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, that did that really happen?
Yeah.
And to this day, I honestly don't know how that happened, but it happened. Uh, you know, and so yeah, I think that was the beginning, and then and I also had I was very fortunate to have a great high school band director at Everett High School, a guy named Gary Evans. And he had a really good jazz band. Um, and I remember hearing the local high school jazz band when I was in middle school, and there were some really great players in there, and that also made a big impression on me too. Uh, so there was, yeah, I think those were some of the earliest encounters.
So speaking of mystery shows, Kansas City in the 90s, we have an area downtown called the River Market, and they used to have these outdoor shows. I saw George Clinton and the P-Funk. There were
Oh
just
man,
really
yeah.
eclectic people that came through. But I remember at one point James Brown came in and it sold
Oh,
out, but it was in this open area where you could get a coffee. And I just I remember getting like a coffee or a beer and just hearing him screaming, "Wow, I feel just it was so weird to just feel the reverberating echo of a legend
yeah.
going through downtown.
Wow.
Same thing with Ray
Yeah.
Charles. I mean, when you get these cats that are legendary that come through these
Yeah.
towns where you're like, who pulled this off? You know? And
Oh yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
that energy. It's awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There was another, I think they also brought Billy Taylor, great jazz pianist. I think
Yeah.
he came, and I think he even did a workshop or master class that I remember attending in high school.
Who was the pianist, the organist that the Beatles pulled in on the Let It Be sessions?
Billy Preston.
Okay, I always get him confused. Just
Yeah.
like yeah, but that was kind of a special thing too. I don't think Billy Preston realized he was what he was doing at the time.
That, I mean, I'm sure that that would be a fascinating story actually to understand
Yeah.
how that would have happened, because I mean, I don't know. Yeah. But it's funny you mentioned that, because actually I wrote a tune. We haven't really recorded it and released. I mean, it's on our SoundCloud page, but we haven't really released it as part of an album. But there's a tune called "Theme for Billy" that's dedicated to Billy Preston.
Wow, that's cool. How did I even remotely get near that electrical current? So, so I'm curious, a- after all of these years,
Mhm.
what gets you up every day to be a
Mhm.
composer, to be a band leader? What motivates you to do this work and to evolve as a creative?
Boy, that's a good question. But I mean, it's just something I love, and also I do get a lot of uh, satisfaction and fulfillment out of doing it, of course, and um, putting it out there, and just the whole process, the creative process is just endlessly sort of fascinating to me how, going back to your question about this album. I mean, the album, once it was all sort of finished, or once we had recorded everything, it wasn't until we had recorded everything that I sort of looked back and realized, oh, wow, this is actually sort of a suite or a series of tributes to my mentors and teachers. Many of the Song for Seals, the first track, Amadish, which is a nod to the great pianist Ahmad Jamal. Chick, as I mentioned, Eulogy, and Invocation actually is also inspired by Ornette Coleman. I mean, that's five tunes right there that were all inspired by people that were important to me in my life. That wasn't planned; it just sort of happened that way. And it's those kind of, I don't know, serendipitous things that really are fascinating to me. And of course, also the fans. I mean, having people come up to me after shows or message me and just tell me how much hearing a certain song meant to them, or just what we do seems to be making a difference in people's lives, on whatever level it does, right? So, and of course, the love for the music. Music to me is just this endlessly fascinating journey, and I just kind of want to see where it's going next.
So, more specifically, why do you love jazz?
I love jazz because it gives artists and listeners the opportunity to really be themselves. And not just to be themselves, but to explore and understand and learn what it means to be yourself, right? And I mean, there's a lot of great Miles Davis quotes, and who knows if he actually said half of them,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But there's one, and I'm there's no reason to believe why he didn't say it, but um, he and he said it takes a long time to learn how to be yourself.
Define your voice. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is so there's so much wisdom in that, right? And to me that's kind of what it's all about, really. I mean, because if you look at the jazz tradition and you look and it's like and only I think jazz and also only in America could you have an art form like jazz. And of course, now it's been embraced all over the world and it's been enriched by the contributions of artists from all over the world. But I think it was only obviously it's an African American art form that was born in this country and it's part of our heritage as Americans. And and it's I think only jazz would you have someone like Miles Davis right there alongside someone like Ornette Coleman and um, Thelonious Monk or Jackie Bard or uh, um, Benny Goodman, Louis Arm. I mean, there's just the voices. There's such a rich diversity of styles and voices, within that, and yet it's all there's room for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And they're all able to speak essentially there's this sort of shared language, but everybody gets to express it in their own way. And I think that and in doing so it just makes the whole thing even richer. So it's not it's not a zero sum game, right? Where, well, if this guy is saying it this way, then that means it's stepping on these guys over here. It's not like that at all. It's so I think that's what really inspires me the most about jazz.
It's interesting because what Miles has talked about in a lot of his quotes, is seminal for being a human being. Sometimes it
Yeah,
takes a long time to be alive on this planet to figure certain things out, you know?
that's
And
right.
even just the idea of, I've embraced from the jazz community this idea of just things happen and they just go up into the ether. From this
Hmm.
fragmented disarray, so to speak, of improv comes this beautiful
Hmm.
piece, right? Just the unknowns that could completely go into all kinds of chaotic directions comes together and it sounds like it's perfect, you know?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is very it. I think it's the musical art form, the style of music that to me is closest, sort of mirrors life itself the closest, like you said, because it is there's a this so much of it revolves around improvisation and interaction and reacting to what's happening in the moment, right? You're reacting to what's happening in the moment, whatever that might be, and you're trying to work with that, which is just like life, and um, and yeah, so much of it is, and it is like all music is has this sort of ephemeral element to it, but jazz in particular, uh, and of course it's really best experienced live. But I think we've also used the opportunities that are available to us being jazz musicians in the 21st century, the incredible technology, and we've been very fortunate to work with some amazing people on this album, including uh, Steve Rodby, who's a Grammy Award-winning producer who contributed additional production and was an invaluable advisor on this project, and Pete Karam, who's a great mixing engineer who mixed it, and I think those guys have really helped us create a recording that I do feel captures the spirit of the band in a really beautiful way. And so yeah, I'm just really excited to get it out there and share it with listeners.
So, Invocation, if anyone wants to pick up a copy, catch you live, any other good business, where do they go?
Go to duendelibre.com. Also, go to our Bandcamp page where you can pre-order the album. You can pre-order, we're having 7-inch, 12-inch vinyl press. We have 7-inch available now, the 12-inch is coming. And so go to our Bandcamp page, follow us on Bandcamp, or you can go to duendelibre.com and you can see our upcoming shows, and also you can get the album there.
Excellent. Alex, this has been wonderful, man. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Thank you for your story.
thank you, Joe, for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Hey, jazz fans, Joe Domino here, the host of the weekly Neon Jazz radio show and regular interview series being produced and distributed from Lee Summit, Missouri. We are very excited to let you know about the second annual Lee Summit Jazz Festival taking place again this summer on June 28th at the Bridge Space, located at 210 Southwest Market Street in downtown Lee Summit. Following the success of the 2024 festival, the lineup will include Lee Summit students, Casey Area Youth Jazz, Paganova with Michael Pagan, Horoscope with Stan Kessler, Brad Gregory, Adam Larson, and the Lee Summit Jazz Orchestra. There will also be food trucks and vendors to round out a day of celebration. Early bird tickets are 2 for $30, and all details can be found at lsjazzfest.com. We can't wait to see you there.